New Zealand has some fascinating diesel locomotives on its rail network, with two of my personal highlights being the DBR and DSJ classes, although my favourite is actually the DC. And just when I thought the motive power on the Driving Creek Railway was the country's strangest diesels, I remembered this bizarre little thing at the Taranaki Pioneer Village. The TPV is located next to State Highway 3, around 2 kilometres south of Stratford town centre, and 35 minutes drive from central New Plymouth. Besides the train ride on a 600mm-gauge railway, the village also has loads of old-fashioned buildings on display, which give a great insight as to how people lived their lives in the first half of the 20th century. Indeed, one of my favourite buildings is the telephone exchange, and I dare say the setup in there would come across as alien technology to younger people, especially Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Standard entry to the village costs 15 New Zealand dollars for adults and $5 for children, while the train ride costs an additional $4 if you're paying for that as well as general admission, which is what I did. It costs a $5 if you just want to go for the train ride. The village is open every Saturday and Sunday from 10 AM to 4 PM, and it's well worth a visit, provided that you get there on a day with nice weather. I must stress that I am not sponsored by the Taranaki Pioneer Village. I'm simply making this video in the hope that it'll encourage more people to visit if they're ever in the Stratford area. It was initially raining when I arrived, and I took shelter in the former Opunake station building, then waited for the rain to stop before getting these static shots of the locomotive and her coaches. These coaches look like they were based on the full-size New Zealand Railways wooden body coaches, examples of which can be seen at Goldfields, Glenbrook, Ferrymead, and many other heritage lines. I initially thought that the TPV only had 2 coaches, and that one of them had been converted into a wheelchair coach, but it turns out that they've just got 2 covered coaches anyway. This locomotive is the main attraction, as far as I'm concerned. She was built in 2005, and she is quite unusual in that, despite looking like a steam locomotive, she's actually a diesel. She does have a whistle, but it's powered by compressed air, and unusually for a New Zealand locomotive, she even has a bell to boot. Come to think of it, I would go so far as to say that the Taranaki Pioneer Village puts Tauranga's historic village to shame, especially since this one still has a railway! The weather had rapidly changed by the time we got moving. Some people might enjoy this kind of situation, where they've got the whole train to themselves, but I was concerned over the lack of other punters at the village while I was there. I just hope that the village still gets busier days, and that they're in a healthy financial state. The little steam outline diesel locomotive takes her coaches round the loop twice, and it was absolutely chucking it down when we got back to the station. I initially took shelter in the old library. The next building is a newspaper office with an old printing press in the back room, and I remember seeing the press in operation when I first visited the museum in September 2020. Only 10 minutes after I got that static shot of the train in the rain, the sun had returned, and I've rarely seen the weather change so often in such a short space of time. Now, I don't blame you if you don't like steam outline locomotives, given that they're pretty much posers, but, in my opinion, this one still has a distinctive charm. I'm not really sure why this railway was built in the first place, but it still offers foamers the chance to capture something unusual and obscure that doesn't have anything to do with the nearby Kiwi rail system. Now we come to the telephone exchange that I mentioned earlier, and despite being born long after these things were rendered obsolete, I've seen enough episodes of Dad's Army to know what a telephone exchange is and how it works. Basically, there were people sitting at these huge panels, and when someone wanted to make a phone call, they would pick up their phone and say something like, for example, "Wilmington on C333 please." Then the operator would pull out a plug and place it in the correct hole for the town and phone number the caller was trying to reach. And here's a quick look around the interior of the telephone exchange. Besides the exchange, this old butchery is one of my favourite buildings in the village. Aside from the terrifying mannequin, this shop reminds me of Corporal Jones, who ran his own butcher shop when he wasn't playing soldiers with Captain Mannering and the rest of the Wilmington-on-Sea platoon. Even though I pretty much had the whole village to myself, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing, I enjoyed my time at the Taranaki Pioneer Village. And after spending over an hour there, I decided to head back to New Plymouth, and called into Inglewood on the way.